Seems like all these international organizations, including even the UN, have sometimes very weird imbalances. I think all of these superpowers have an outsized influence. I actually wanted to ask you, because you had mentioned Israel.
The United States has overwhelming influence. China has minor influence. And if China uses it illegitimately, it's all over the front pages. If the United States uses it illegitimately, maybe you can read it in some dissident post somewhere.
Well,
important things to keep in mind.
My question, and then I want to get to the freedom of speech issue in the United States, because that's the subject of what I'm talking about. But just internationally, it seems like all these international organizations, including even the UN, have sometimes very weird imbalances. Like you mentioned Israel, and it's a complex issue on all sides, but the UN has condemned Israel in some respects more than any other country, sometimes more than all other countries combined in different years. What do you think explains the UN's slant? Because at some point it becomes almost farcical. If they condemn, for example, Israel, it'd be the worst violator of women's rights in the world. When
the UN protects Israel to an extraordinary extent. Israel is the only country in the world which is guaranteed a veto by the United States in the UN Security Council. So just recently, for example, when Israel was battering and destroying Gaza, there was a UN call for a ceasefire, was blocked by the Biden administration.
One moment, but what you're describing...
Only country that benefits from the ability to carry out radical violations of international law with the support and protection of the United States.
But right.
Everything that Israel does in the West Bank, Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, Gaza, is in radical violation of international law. It is authorized by the United States, and therefore it proceeds.
I just wanted to ask you one thing. Sorry, I wanted to ask you, what you just described, isn't it not the UN protecting Israel, but the US? The United States is the one country that's vetoing, but I'm talking about the United Nations. I'm saying that the UN resolutions taken as a whole disproportionately single out Israel on issues where maybe 20 other countries are worse objectively on those issues.
Which other country has carried out a 55-year illegal occupation of another country?
Well, you could look, I don't want to get on TV saying this, but there are multiple countries that I can name that have done that.
Very few. I mean, there's Morocco in Western Sahara, which is very recent and authorized by the United States.
Well, just out of curiosity, what do you think China is doing in Tibet, for example?
The issue of China and Tibet is very mixed. It's not in violation of international law. There's a complex issue about whether Tibet was part of China. It's not resolved, and there's no international law involved.
So what I'm saying is, and again, we're getting into these geopolitical issues, but there are always people who disagree. Ukrainian separatists say that Russia has been occupying Ukraine, and Russia says it's always been, Crimea has always been part of Russia. I also just really, I just want to, just one quick,
direct, explicit violation of Security Council orders.
Right. I just wanted to say that everywhere that
Israel is alone in that respect.
I just wanted to quickly, well, whether international law is the determining factor here, I'm saying it leads to an interesting imbalance in the resolutions, because the Kurds don't have their own country. The Basque people, Catalonia has been trying to separate from Spain for a long time. And just recently, Spain, I think they had a vote, and then Spain just completely
Right.
What did they do? They just arrested people and
And
yeah.
that is, I think it's wrong. It is not in violation of Security Council orders. It is not in violation of international law.
What about when Bangladesh was trying to separate from Pakistan and there was genocidal rape happening? Is that in violation of international law or is not?
I didn't hear.
Sorry, when Pakistan, when Bangla people, the Bangladeshi people were separating from Pakistan, the United States supported they supported Pakistan and China supported, I guess, the independence. There was a genocidal rape campaign during this time. Would you say that that was against international law? Like, what exactly is the mechanism by which you condemn?
Because it was internal to Pakistan. And but what happened is Kissinger strongly supported the Pakistani atrocities when India intervened to try to stop them. The United States, under Kissinger's direction, launched attacks on India. A boycott sent a fleet into the areas near India to threaten them, to try to compel them to back off from protecting the Bengalis from the Pakistani attack. But it was not an issue of international law. It was a major crime, strongly supported by the United States. China wasn't seriously involved. India was.
So is it fair? Yeah, India was definitely, but is it fair to say that the disproportionate calling out of Israel, let's say, more than some years, more than all other countries combined, is an artifact of the fact that whatever happens there is in violation of international law, whereas if you have genocide, you can have mass killings, you can have dispossession of people, you can have the Tatars from Crimea being deported, right, by the USSR. You can have all these things, but they were not condemned by the UN because they're internal matters. Is that?
First of all, the Tatars before the UN. Okay.
Oh, before, that's true. Yeah, it would be hard to condemn. Sure.
Of the native population.
Let me do a direct comparison just really quickly. So when Assad, for example, runs Syria, and during the civil war, he drops on Yarmouk, the largest Palestinian refugee camp, they're being bombed by Assad.
It's a major crime.
There's no UN condemnation of that.
Inside Syria, we may not like international law, but international law does not apply to activities inside a sovereign state. I don't like it. You don't like it, but that happens to
right.
be.
I'm just trying to call things as they are by the name, because the international community has let the Hutus and the Tutsis have a civil war, very deadly genocide. They had the Rwanda thing. A lot of things could have stopped. Right now in Venezuela, the international community is divided about what they're going to do. So I'm not really that excited by the international community's plans for people on the ground in general.
I don't understand what you're saying. Are we discussing international law and the UN Security Council, or are we discussing criminal activities?
I guess to me, if there's an atrocity, I would like to weigh it by how bad it is and not by technicalities, like whether it's
fine. So you're not interested in international law. So we can put that aside.
Right. I guess
condemnation by somebody of crimes everywhere. Yes, there should be condemnations of today of the United States reimposing Jim Crow legislation in every Republican-run state. We should certainly condemn that. It's not a crime under international law.
But the UN only condemns crimes which are under violating international law.
It's set up in such a way that what happens internal to sovereign states is not within the domain of the United Nations. So, for example, if you look at the Human Rights Commission condemnations of Israel, they're not condemning the fact that in Israel, 90% of the land is reserved to people of, I'm quoting, Jewish race, religion, and origin. That's not what they're condemning. They're condemning what's done in the occupied territories, which is in violation of international law and Security Council orders.
Well, you just mentioned the United States bringing Jim Crow or perhaps racist policies. Many countries seem to be also having racist policies.
Condemn that too.
So my question is like, just forget international law for a moment. When people use rhetoric to say, for example, Israel is an apartheid regime, do you agree with that? Do you think that it is apartheid? Because I know you've said in the past you think it's worse than apartheid because of.
Actually, I've said something more nuanced. The apartheid condemnation is not from the United Nations. It's from the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and B'Tselem, the main Israeli human rights organization.
Well, what is it that they say exactly?
Well, it's a little nuanced, but the essence of it is that it's a Jewish dominant regime over the whole territory, which is a counterpart to apartheid.
But how is that different than Armenia being an Armenian-dominated regime over Nagorno-Karabakh and all the other regions in Armenia, or anything else?
All right, it's not. It's not. They don't have. If a country has laws which privilege, the United States had laws saying that 90% of the land should be reserved to people of white Christian religion and origin, that would be subject to condemnation.
Okay.
Against international law. Okay.
But if Israeli citizens had equal rights, if, for example, you said all Israeli Arabs had equal rights to do everything that Jewish Israelis have.
You're kind of fudging the issue. There's two questions. One, Israel within its legal boundaries, and the other, the Israeli occupied territories. The innovation of B'Tselem, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, is to say that by now, with the erosion by Israel's erosion of the international border, it's become a unitary phenomenon of Jewish dominance over the entire area, which is equivalent to apartheid. If you want to know my own opinion, it's what it was before. Israel internally, within its borders, is guilty of extreme racist discrimination, but not apartheid. In the occupied territories, it's worse than apartheid. For the reasons I've explained, I could go over it.
No, my main question with all this is that people single out Israel for many reasons. But
they single out Israel for special privileges. Israel is alone in being privileged to carry out radical crimes, monstrous crimes, violation of international law, violation of Security Council orders, and it gets away with it. Not only gets away with it, but the United States not only protects it, but provides it with $4 billion of aid a year.
That may be, my point is, although that may be true, I'm also saying the other way, right? But also I'm talking about completely the other way. I'm saying, let me illustrate what one second. Let me illustrate what I'm saying. For example, if Israel is called an apartheid state for
Human Rights Watch.
For example, Human Rights Watch. The founder of Human Rights Watch, I believe, resigned or said that now he's not on board with their agenda. But I don't know. Look, I think I just want to ask the question. To me, the issues are important. The suffering of actual people is important. So if someone is, for example, evicted from a building after due process and court cases, it's not the same thing. And it's not as bad as genocidal rape of thousands of people or bombing an entire, refugee camp. I think we'll both agree on that. So my question is, by the same standard that Israel is judged by people who say there's an apartheid state, can you name any Middle Eastern country or any country in that region that is not an apartheid state? Can you name several that are by the same exact? Jordan, for example, Lebanon doesn't let the Palestinians even have citizenship or own property for decades. And by the way, they're born there. People who are Lebanese, but they had to have a grandfather in a Nakba, no citizenship. So by that standard, Lebanon would be an apartheid state. Syria would definitely be an apartheid state. Jordan, maybe with the Bedouins, could be considered. Oh, Bedouin population. Obviously, the Hashemites gave special privileges to the Bedouins, and Jordan used to occupy the West Bank as well. So every country in that region. My point is, why is Israel so special?
If I think there are very good reasons, namely the occupation. But if you believe what you're saying, you should be attacking B'Tselem, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International.
I'm not attacking anyone. I'm just asking why.
They're the only ones who are saying, okay, so you should be attacking first B'Tselem, which was the first to do it, Israel's main human rights organization, then Human Rights Watch, then Amnesty International.
No. All I'm trying to say is put it a sense of proportion, put it in context. If a country, whether it's Israel or any other country, is doing something that's bad, but on the list of countries, it's number 25, right? And if you take an issue, say women's rights, you can't constantly say Israel is the number one bad actor in every one of these things. You have to be honest about it and say, yeah, Israel's number 25.
No, Israel's number one in occupying a foreign territory in direct violation of Security Council orders and, of course, international law, and carrying out constant crimes there. That's unique.
That's unique because other countries have already accomplished it, and now it's within their borders.
We conquered. I happen to be living in occupied Mexico, so yes, we conquered it, and that's.
To me, that's a distinction without a difference from a.
Well, fine. Every country is involved in crimes. There is one case of direct violation of Security Council orders, international law, with a powerful support of the United States, enormous support from US media who cover up for it constantly, have been doing it for 60 years. British media too, most of the West. And yes, much of the world is opposed.
I'm just saying much of the world with France and Algeria, everything has already happened. So as long as it already happened and it's within the borders, it's not considered.
Happened before modern international law was established.
All right. Well, fine. All I'm trying to say is
the Native Americans doesn't come up to the UN because it was finished at the end of the 19th.
Well, that's a good example. The Native Americans could be said to be living in Bantustans inside the United States with their own sovereign countries and bad economies, you could say.
Yeah, but that's internal to the United States and therefore not subject to the UN.
Well, they're sovereign countries, these Native American reservations.
They're not sovereign countries under international law. Okay.
So it's a technicality.
If you don't like the UN, that's fine. But we're talking about, well, if we're asking what the UN does, it's within the framework that the United States established in 1947.
Okay, but you as a person, you would call on Lebanon to offer citizenship to native-born people.
I would. I've done it many times. You don't have to ask me to.
I think if Lebanon did that and Syria would do that, I think then Israel could offer a right of return.
In Lebanon, every time I'm there, and I've been there many times, I visit the camps. I talk in the newspapers about how Palestinians should be allowed the right to enter Lebanese society. I do it in Lebanon where it matters.
Right.
And
that's good. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
And that's exactly what I do. So you should do it too.
I do do it. My whole point is that it should be a regional solution. If there's a diaspora, like the Rohingya people right now, we're talking to.
We certainly have deal with the problem of the Palestinian refugees, but that has nothing to do with Israel's uniquely privileged position.